If you're a professional brewer, you know how frustrating it can be when you go to place a yeast order and what you're looking for is out of stock. Well, Imperial Yeast is here to help by guaranteeing that commercial orders up to 20 liters of 10, yes, 10 of their most popular strains will ship free if they're not in stock when you place your order. Some of these strains include A38 Juice for those hazy IPAs, A07 Flagship, a classic in clean American styles, L13 Global, which is said to be one of the world's most popular lager strains, A44 Viking for your warm fermented beers, and so many more. So in addition to pitching right with the highest quality yeast on the market, they're promising that yeast will be ready when you need it or shipping is on them. Whether you're a pro or a home brewer, if you haven't tried Imperial Yeast in your brewery, it's time to up your game. You can check out everything Imperial Yeast has to offer and place your commercial orders at imperialyeast.com. When I started brewing back in early 2003, the popular thing was IPA, imagine that, but not the fruity versions we've all come to love today. No, it was all about bitterness. Then, as brewers began using hops later in the brewing process, the various versions of West Coast IPA became all the rage. After a seemingly short stint where session IPA, particularly those that were very, very hoppy because of the dry hops, were the main focus, we witnessed the explosion of the haze craze, and soon after, their adjunct-laden, sweet, milk-shaky cousins. Then, perhaps as a function of palate fatigue, I don't know, hard seltzer and soda hit the scene to the point they're now staples in most tap rooms. Suffice to say, the craft beer revolution is now perhaps more accurately termed an evolution. This is the Brewlosophy Podcast. I'm your host, Marshall Schott, and in this Brews Views episode, I'm joined by contributor Cade Jobe to chat about our thoughts and opinions on what appears to be the latest growing trend in craft beer and home brewing, low and no alcohol beers.
Yeah, low and no alcohol beers. Isn't that a mouthful? I mean, I guess we can just call it what people are trying to call it, nab labs. I mean, I don't know if that's any better, but yeah, I mean, you know, I got a good relationship with low and no alcohol beer, so I'm kind of a fan. I don't know that I'm a fanboy. I certainly like alcoholic beer better. But it's definitely making its way into my, regular beer consumption. So I'm pretty excited to talk about this one and share some personal opinions.
So I spent the better part of my childhood with a mom and stepdad who were Budweiser drinkers, and I'd often ask for little sips. I was the weird kid who actually loved the smell and taste of BMC beer. I don't know why, but I carried that on with me as an adult. Well, I'll never forget the time when after my stepdad's birthday, I think it was on his birthday actually, my mom brought home a 6-pack of O'Doul's, which back then was like the most popular, quote, near beer. Feel free to judge my parents. I'm perfectly fine with that. Anyway, up until a couple years ago, I tried a handful of other types of non-alcoholic beers, all modeled after mass market lager, and none really did it for me. That said, I was genuinely surprised to learn that brewers out there were employing various techniques to make the craft beer styles we all love with low or no alcohol at all. I've since had a number of these beers and look forward to sharing my opinions with you today, Cade. Now, a couple quick things. First off, this is not an experience episode, but a Brews Views episode, meaning we're not going to be getting into the various methods brewers are using to create low and no alcohol beers, but rather sharing our unabashed opinions about this trend. And as such, be warned, we may not be censoring ourselves nearly as much as we usually do. So if certain language is something that bothers you, or if people sharing their own personal opinions chaps your hide, you may want to hold off on listening to this episode. It is not our intention to offend anybody. We're just having fun, blowing hard about this topic of low and no alcohol brewing. All right, if you enjoy this show and would like to make sure it sticks around, consider becoming a patron of Brewlosophy at patreon.com/Brewlosophy, where in return for making a small monthly pledge, you'll receive all sorts of cool rewards, which we will be sending out for March of 2022 later this week. And there are some doozies this month. For those who pledge just $5 per month, you'll receive a discount code to YVH that's good for an additional $5 off the already discounted price of their 2021 experimental hop variety pack. And our live Q&A guest guest for this month, which requires a pledge of only $3, are the hosts of the Homebrew Happy Hour podcast, Joshua Stubing, Todd Burns, and James Carlson. If you haven't already, go check that podcast out. It's a killer resource for homebrewers, especially considering the hosts all work in the brewing industry in some capacity. In order to get in on the action, you have to make your pledge at patreon.com/brewlosophy by Friday, March 25th, 2022, as the guys are going to be taking questions on Saturday, the 26th. Again, head over to patreon.com/brewlosophy to check out all of the rewards we offer in exchange for your support. Another really easy way to help us out is by using the links found at brewlosophy.com/support when you're shopping online. Your experience doesn't change at all. You don't even know you're using the link unless you click it, and we get a little kickback for that referral. Feedback is brought to you by Brewers Hardware, who offer brewers beautiful stainless gear such as the turnkey BH15 pilot brewing system, which has a hard plumb manifold to eliminate all hosing changes during the brew process. Brewers Hardware has a ton of unique, purpose-built products useful to both professionals and homebrewers. Go see for yourself at brewershardware.com, and don't forget to mention Brewlosophy at checkout to receive a free gift. That is brewershardware.com. Jonah DeWaters from Portland, Maine had some feedback on bottle conditioning IPA, especially hazy IPA, after listening to our latest Brew and A episode, which was number 220. Jonah says, while I keg my beer these days, I have successfully bottle conditioned any IPAs without oxidizing them. My method is to skip the bottling bucket and use carbonation tabs put into each bottle before racking. This allows me to rack the beer straight into the bottle from the fermenter. Then I cap the bottles immediately after filling. My working theory is that the small amount of oxygen that gets into the bottle during filling is scavenged by the yeast during bottle conditioning. This method doesn't require any special tools, and you can get carbonation tablets from pretty much any homebrew supplier for really cheap. That said, I still think kegging is preferable, but I wanted to pass along this tip to those that bottle condition.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a great way to do it in terms of, oxygen scavenging, and especially if you're going directly from the fermenter or wherever, from the fermenter into the bottle, then you're going to minimize your oxygen pickup. You're dropping the carbonation tab in there so the yeast can consume that, and they'll take up the oxygen that's in the bottle as they're re-fermenting. I mean, that's honestly one of the reasons why a lot of breweries bottle condition, right? I mean, or one of the reasons why breweries certainly started bottle conditioning, hundreds of years ago, is because it does a really good job. Maybe not hundreds of years ago, 150 years ago or so. Because I don't think bottles were around that long, but anyway, you know what I'm saying, right? Yeah. This is the reason why breweries might have switched to that, because it's a way of preserving and stabilizing your beer, because the yeast will consume the alcohol the oxygen rather than just letting the oxygen, percolate throughout the beer and cause these, unwanted flavors that happen. So I think that's a really interesting idea. I would worry though, especially with hazies, they can be particularly susceptible to oxygen. So even just putting them in a bottle that has air in it, right, could expose it to enough that would cause a little bit of a flavor loss. But you may, what if you purged the bottle first too? If you just purge the bottle with some CO2 and then direct directly into it with the carb tab. I don't know.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say, is there are, the Blickman beer gun has a purging feature. Again, if you're bottle conditioning and then you're going off and buying all of this special equipment, it's almost like, maybe you should just keg. If you already have kegs and you've already got the beer gun, that is the safer route. But that being said, I know that there are people out there who just don't have the capacity to keg. And what Jonah's saying makes a lot of sense to me. That's exactly what I would do if I had to bottle condition and I brewed hazy IPA, is I would use carb tabs, and I would buy a Blickman beer gun. I would ferment in, I think I said this in that episode, I would ferment in kegs so that beer, while it's in the keg, never touches air. And then I would push the beer out of the keg with CO2 into bottles using some sort of a beer gun or one of those homemade kind of beer gun things where you can still purge with a little bit of CO2 first and cap them immediately. I mean, that would just be the route that I would take in hopes of reducing any risk of oxidation. Now, Jonah did include a picture of 2 glasses of the same hazy IPA he brewed, one of which was kegged while the other was bottle conditioned. He said that the beers were about 3 weeks old, and I'll tell you, to my eyes, they looked identical. Neither of them had that kind of telltale purplish, grayish looking color when they're oxidized. They looked good. So maybe Jonah's onto something here. If you bottle condition and you're getting away with bottle conditioning your hazy IPA without them oxidizing, let us know. I think it's pretty cool.
Yeah, for sure. And, the one reason I don't bottle condition is because I don't like to clean bottles, right? So putting a carb tab in there and bottle conditioning would be fine. It's just I don't like to mess with all the bottles. That's why I keg. That way it's just one vessel to clean. But carbonation, but that's how it works, right? I mean, the science is sound there. The yeast will consume the oxygen that's in the bottle, and so it should not cause too much of an issue. Now that's cool. I'm so glad that that took a picture of two bottles, or that one was kegged and then one was, not bottles, but two glasses. One was from kegged beer and one was from bottle conditioned beer. And they looked the same. That's really cool. And that's a good example. I wonder what would happen, in 4 months, or not 4 months, 4 weeks, a month, a month and a half. It would be kind of cool to take some overtime pictures there if he's got them.
Yeah.
And send them to us. But if not, hopefully he's already crushed that beer.
Also, why didn't you do a triangle test, Jonah? Come on, man. That's what I would have done. Because hey, they might look the same, but maybe they taste different. We've done experiments on that, and ripe opportunity to try out the triangle test on yourself with two beers that you already got made. So, well, if you bottle condition and you're struggling with oxidation, consider giving Jonah's idea here a shot. Carb tabs really are very cheap. You just plop them into your bottle. You can do one tab per bottle. You rack the beer into there, you cap it off, and then it'll be carbonated in about 2 to 3 weeks. So, well, thank you for the feedback, Jonah. If you have show feedback, you can send it to feedback@brulosophy.com or drop us a note on social media. We've got to take a quick break. When we're back, we'll be sharing our open and honest thoughts on low and no alcohol beers. Craftmaster Growlers takes traveling with and sharing beer to a new level. Made from heavy-duty stainless steel, Craftmaster Growlers are double-wall insulated and can keep beer cold for up to 8 hours. Unlike typical growlers, Craftmaster Growlers come with a swiveling tap and fully integrated CO2 regulator cap, allowing beer to stay fresh for 2 weeks or more. The square design takes up less space and will fit in most refrigerator doors, and every Craftmaster Growler comes with a 1-year warranty. There are 64 and 128-ounce versions available over at craftmastergrowlers.com. After a long brew day, the last thing I want to do is waste more time chilling wort. I've tried so many different options, and ultimately I settled on the super efficient immersion chillers made by Jaded Brewing. With the King Cobra and Hydra, I'm able to chill my entire batch of wort from boiling to just a few degrees above groundwater temperature in as little as 6 minutes. If an immersion chiller is right for your brewery, then do yourself a favor and check out all of the rad options Jaded Brewing has to offer at jadedbrewing.com. And be sure to let them know Brulosophy sent you.
Compact and simple to use with a small footprint for brewing indoors, the Grainfather makes it easy for you to brew professional quality beers at home. The Grainfather is an all-in-one brewing system that lets you brew all-grain beer in a single, compact stainless steel unit. It uses an electric heating element and pump to maintain a constant temperature and to circulate the wort during the mashing and cooling stages. It also comes with a counterflow chiller to reduce chilling times and produce high-quality wort. And now, with the addition of their conical fermenter, the Grainfather takes things one step further by offering homebrewers state-of-the-art temperature-controlled fermentation just like commercial breweries use. And with the Grainfather Recipe Creator and Connect app, you can easily design a recipe, sync your brewing system with your phone, and then just sit back and relax as the app takes over and assures that you maintain your scheduled mash temps and boil schedule. Head to Grainfather.com to purchase your all-in-one brewing system today and to sign up for their free recipe creator tool. Once more, head on over to Grainfather.com, that's Grainfather.com, and get started today.
Family-owned Atlantic Brew Supply is the largest homebrew shop in the Southeast. No gimmicks, no multinational corporate overlords, and no BS. They offer exclusive malts, yeast, and more from local artisans, as well as award-winning recipe kits. They also sell professional brewing gear and cask equipment from sister companies ABS Commercial and Cask Supply. Most ingredients are available by the ounce, plus Atlantic Brew Supply has an on-site calculator to help you craft your best brew. Orders are processed same day, and 2-day shipping is guaranteed for East Coast customers. Get 15% off your first order using promo code code BREWPOD. That's BRUPOD at AtlanticBrewSupply.com. I love beer. And as I've said before, without reservation, alcohol is one of many reasons why I love beer so much. Without a doubt, the seemingly endless variety of flavors, aromas, strengths, and even appearances only adds more to the excitement of drinking for me. But I'd be lying if I said I don't enjoy the buzz that comes with sipping that second pint of double IPA, the third stein of Munich Helles, or that sixth can of Miller Lite. I've always viewed alcohol as one part of the gestalt of beer, but I've only recently started to question its necessity thanks to the rising popularity of low and no alcohol brewing approaches and the beers that result from that. Now, as I mentioned before, we're going to do our best to refrain from getting into the methods for brewing these beers. And if that's what you're looking for, fret not. We will be doing an experience episode where we cover that in the future. That said, I do think it's fair to start this opinionated discussion with at least some clarification on what we mean by low or no alcohol beer in the modern context.
Yeah, this is one of those things that I love too, right? Like I always have an opinion on this because it's like low versus no according to who, right? Because like in the US, no alcohol literally means you can sell a beer marketed as no alcohol to as long as it's less than 0.5% ABV. And like I'm like, hold on, like my wife is pregnant right now, right? We're expecting our second child, and you're kidding me? She can have a beer, or she can have something that she thinks is no alcohol that's labeled as no alcohol, or hell, even good for pregnant women. It doesn't have to carry the Surgeon General's warning. And she can drink something that does actually have ABV, at least 0.5% ABV in it. That's crazy. That's nuts, right?
Yeah. I actually read somewhere somebody was asking online about, can kids buy non-alcoholic beer? The answer to that, my understanding is in most states, no, you can't. It's because it's still considered beer, and kids cannot buy beer. But a doctor got on this thread that I was checking out in prepping for this show, saying that the 0.5% alcohol is so quickly metabolized by your body that you could drink like 10 of these beers, crush 10 in a row, and you're not going to have any effect. You probably feel sick, but it really is like that level of alcohol is so quickly taken care of by your body that it will not have the inebriating effects of, say, drinking like a 6% alcohol beer.
Well, yeah, sure, but we assume that it actually has 0.5% alcohol or less in it, right? I mean, we know this. You and I know this as homebrewers. We know that if you don't filter out the yeast that's left in there, eventually it may consume those sugars, right? Like whatever sugars are in there, it can consume it down to whatever level. So depending on how you're making this beer, for example, if you're just doing a stop fermentation, right? Like if you're just like cutting off the fermentation by dropping the temperature down and letting the yeast settle out or something like that. As soon as that beer goes back up to temperature, guess what's going to happen? That yeast is going to ferment again, and it's going to increase the alcohol level in this beer. So, and I read an article, I can't remember where it was. There's a reason I brought up my wife and their pregnancy on this, and it's because she doesn't drink these ABV beers because, like you said, the doctor said, hey, that low of a level of 0.5% isn't going to do much. But this agency that had tested this is I think it may have even been Consumer Reports or something like that. They tested a whole bunch of alcohol on shelves, and it ranged anywhere from 0 all the way up to 2.5% in something that's actively labeled and sold on U.S. shelves as a no alcohol beer. Now, 2.5% is going to be totally different than 0.5, right? And that's going to just have totally different effects. And so, I mean, we assume that it is actually correct whenever it's labeled, but there's no guarantee that beer is actually going to, I mean, if it's Budweiser or Miller Coors or, any of those guys like Bud Zero or Sharps or any of that stuff, sure. I don't think they're going to risk sending something off into circulation that's actually going to be outside of TTB specs. But there's that's a concern, right?
Yeah, I would think so. If you're calling it low or no alcohol and it has alcohol in it.
Yeah. The other thing that I think is hilarious is they're technically called cereal beverages, as opposed to malt beverages. So, okay, I don't know. Figure that one out. Like, I don't understand why. I don't understand why we have to have this different classification. I mean, I know why. It's because of taxes and all the bullshit that taxes are in the United States. But,
shall we share our opinions on that? No, we'll leave that one alone.
Well, I mean, we can share it sort of in the history, right? Like, I'm not gonna mess with taxes in terms. I'm not gonna take on taxes in a Brew Labs episode. But it is interesting to know that too, that the taxing of those beers is different, right?
Yeah.
If you have something that's over 0.5% ABV in the US, you pay an excise tax on it, right? So it's just an alcoholic beverage excise tax because it has alcohol in it that can get somebody drunk, which is a hangover, my understanding, at least from Prohibition.
Yeah, I think Prohibition, you can't talk about low and no alcohol beers without talking about Prohibition, which I guess we can interject some opinion on this. What the hell was the government thinking, right? How puritanical we were being to outlaw a person's right to drink whatever the hell it is they want to drink. And so this was back in 1919. Based on the research that I did, the first near beers were produced around that time, right? 1919, 1920, because of Prohibition. So people still wanted the flavor of beer in a can and drinking it. And so some breweries came up with ways of producing it that had, about 0.5% of alcohol by volume in it. And that is kind of where the whole near beer thing really got started, at least based on my research.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I think that's when, or at least in the United States. Now, from like a bigger perspective, though, this is a story that I heard whenever I was visiting New Zealand. There was a brewery there called McCashin's Brewery, and it's like a big famous brewery in New Zealand, like one of the original craft breweries in New Zealand. And I was on a tour there, and they were saying, there's different serving sizes in New Zealand, and I think it's the same in like the UK and England. You can get a 12-ounce beer, like what we would call here in the United States is 355, but then 355 milliliters. But then there's smaller serving portions, right? In the United States, it's like half pints and stuff. And that smaller serving size and the reasons for having a lower alcoholic beer and not paying taxes on it is there was a really, really bad domestic abuse problem at the turn of the century. I mean, there were a whole bunch of people getting drunk and abusing their families.
Yeah.
I mean, I went to an exhibit at the Bob Bullock Museum in Texas, and I mean, there were all these things about fetal alcohol syndrome.
Sure.
Domestic violence. I mean, fetal alcohol syndrome was one of those things. I couldn't believe it. There was a sign. They had this doctor's recommendation that was published in a medical journal at the turn of the century in like the 1900s, and it was like pregnant and having, I think it was something like morning sickness, drink no more than 2 beers at breakfast. Jeez. And I was like, wait, what? like drink no more than 2 beers and that'll help your morning sickness. You can have 2 though.
Yeah.
That's fine. Just, 2 every day at breakfast. And I just think, wow, we just totally didn't understand, the health impact of this. So I can certainly see, hey, you've got all these sort of societal problems, there's at least some defense of prohibition, but still, really, we're going to cut out all alcohol except in religious ceremonies. We're going to allow religious ceremonies.
Yeah, it's safe there, of course, because, it's been bestowed upon the people to pretend it's something else. But, the whole near beer thing is an interesting thing to me, and the rise of it today and it's, the rise in its popularity, it is becoming very popular. I have a local friend, you guys have heard him before. His name is Sean Wood, who he does a lot of the sour program stuff at House of Pendragon here in town. He has been on this low alcohol kick for a while now, and he's making these beers like classic styles, BJCP defined styles with like 2% alcohol. And now when I hear low alcohol, that's where my mind goes, is that 2 to 3% range or lower, and then no alcohol is 0.5% or lower. That's how I've come to kind of think of these two low and no alcohol beers. And so he's been focusing more on the low alcohol thing. And I have not tried these beers yet. I haven't seen them in a bit, thanks to COVID and stuff. But I'll tell you, he's loving them, and he has got a palate. He is a astute beer drinker. So I have to believe that what he's doing, the techniques that he's employing to make these lower alcohol beers are working out for him. So let's talk a little bit about some of the reasons one might be interested in making low and no alcohol beer. The way I think about it in some ways is similar to the way I think about this whole the goal of producing vegan and or vegetarian food that tastes like meat. I have nothing but respect for people who choose to be vegan or vegetarian. It has nothing to do with that. But there's a part of me that's looking and saying, well, geez, emulating the very thing that you aren't eating, particularly if it's for moral reasons as opposed to health reasons, seems a little bit weird to me. So you like the flavor of these things, which I get. Or one person argued, I was having this conversation, and they said, well, maybe it's to try to convince people that they can eat this stuff instead of meat. Okay, I get that. But I almost feel like, hey, let's make this our new thing. Let's make it taste just as good and as desirable. And and we don't need to call it beer. It can be something else. It can be a cereal beverage or whatever else. So I'm kind of like, I like alcohol. I don't have issues drinking alcohol. So for me, there would be no reason to just focus on low or no alcohol beer. But one reason that I know of quite a few people is the whole health thing, namely trying to lose some weight, right? Alcohol, we know, or not alcohol, but beer, we know contains quite a few calories.
Well, yeah, but before we go on to the health, I want to sort of in defense of vegetarianism here.
I'm all for vegetarianism. Don't get me wrong. It's eating meat flavored non-meat that it's kind of funny for me to think about.
Well, but that's the comment, right? It's like the meat flavored meat, or meat flavored not meat, but there are moral, questions about this,
sure,
right? Like,
yeah.
I'm not a vegetarian. My wife is. She's pescatarian, so she eats fish, but not chicken and pork and meat and stuff like that. But there are questions about that, right? There's questions about how our food is prepared. There's a whole book from Upton Sinclair that's one of the most well-known books in American literature that was entirely about all of the problems with meat processing around the turn of the century. Now, clearly, we're a long way away from that, right? We're 100 years and a lot of laws and a lot of regulation and a lot of, unfortunately, sick people, away from that. But there's those moral concerns. And then a great example, we were watching Food Network a couple nights ago, and they had crawfish, and they're like crawling across the little table, and my sitting there with my son who's 3, and he points to it and he goes, "Oh, look, they're crawling." And I was like, "Yeah, they're crawling." And then 5 minutes later, after they boiled the crawfish, they're not crawling anymore. And my son goes, "Daddy, they're not crawling." And I was like, "Yeah, they're not." And he goes, "Why?" It's like,
here's
crap.
A lesson, little one.
Yeah, I know. I'm not prepared for this. Hold on. I thought you were supposed to ask these questions when you're like 6 or 7, not when you're 3.
Yeah.
But that's to say, I understand that not wanting to kill an animal, but wanting to have something that tastes like beef. For example, I was raised eating meat, and I still eat meat. So I don't, but I also eat Beyond Meat and Impossible and, some of the chicken patties and stuff that come out. And I like the flavor of those things, but I also like that it's not killing an animal, right? I mean, and so that's part of it, and I don't think there's anything bad about that. So back to the no alcohol, low alcohol beer thing. I think there are reasons why people need to or may want this thing. And it's not necessarily just, people who have issues drinking alcohol, right? Certainly if you have an issue with drinking alcohol, maybe drinking a beer would be kind of like a nicotine patch or something for a cigarette smoker. It might be a way to get off or to transition off of something that you're addicted to. I have no idea if that's even something that would work. But then health is a big deal too, right? I mean, certainly something that I think more about as I get older. It's just like, I can't consume. You mentioned, having 6 Miller Lights. I can't tell you the last time I had 6 Miller Lights, because if I have 6 of those, I'm going to be so hungover the next morning. And I know some people are like, really? It's basically just water.
Miller Lights, my low alcohol beer.
I know. Yeah, exactly. It is. But I mean, I don't know what it is, like bad hangover genes or whatever, but I'll just be miserable, and I'm dehydrated, and I just feel like crap. I'm a grumpy person, so one of the reasons why I like no alcohol and low alcohol beer is because it doesn't come with all of those, consequences. It doesn't come with the next day hangover. I love a barley wine, but I'm not drinking 5 barley wines, right? And I'm not sure that I could drink 5 non-alcohol beers either. To be honest.
Well, and that's the thing. In the next segment, we are going to just break down our thoughts on the non-alcohol beers that we've tried. I thought that would just be fun and maybe give people out there who are interested some ideas as to where to look to get their non-alcohol beers. But for me, just the concept of non-alcohol beer. We often hear, and we've said it a million times as well, because it's a great way to open a show, that beer is made of 4 main ingredients, right? That's malt, hops, water, and yeast. To me, it's not beer when it doesn't have that alcohol. For me, I am not speaking for anybody else out there. There's this misconception, I think, with people who have a voice or who have a podcast and a website that people read, that we are trying to influence others. Particularly in the Brews Views series, that is not the case. We literally are just sharing our stupid opinions. So this is my opinion. I view beer as, again, we've used this term a few times, the gestalt of beer includes alcohol for me. I don't have an issue with it. We are talking a little bit about health. We've had an episode on managing our health while being beer drinkers. As Cade knows, we've talked about this. I don't really even drink at all during the week anymore. I used to come home from work. I'd have 4 or 5 samples of the home brew that I have on tap, every night. I wouldn't get drunk or anything. So even at my height, when I was really, drinking more than I do now, it was never an issue for me. I didn't put on weight when I started homebrewing. I didn't, it wasn't this big thing that got in the way. I still exercise. I go to work every day. I do this. So for me, there's no reason in terms of mental and or physical health that I would need to reduce the alcohol in the beer. So there are other reasons though. Obviously, you mentioned earlier, Cade, the whole problem that we've done a Brews Views on this as well. Problems with actual alcohol consumption and misuse.
Yeah, exactly. I think there is a certain population out there that has had misuse of alcohol, or
Absolutely.
especially. And that's certainly something that we want to be conscious of, right? Thankfully, I'm not in that bucket, or at least not yet, and hopefully don't ever get in that bucket. But I don't know if I've mentioned it on the show before, but I do a dry January every year. I started it a few years ago, and the reason I do dry January is just a refresh, right? It's not because I think I have a problem, or it's not because I want to get healthy for 1 month and then forget all of my New Year's resolutions, although that happens. But
everybody, basically.
To everybody, right? But no, it's you actually made a good point about that, about dry January. You're like, no, if I wanted to make a change, I'm just going to make the change.
Yeah.
January 1st doesn't matter. If I want to make a change, I'm just going to make it. I'm not going to tie it specifically to the new year. But I do like to refresh, because I find myself drinking a lot more around the holidays. It's probably just because there's parties and there's, non-COVID years, but, there's parties and there's family, or, hell, even some COVID. I drank more during COVID. I think we've talked about that too before, but anyway, my point is, around that time of the year, I find myself consuming more alcohol than I do in the rest of the year. And so it's just, for me, it's a nice refresh. Hey, I don't ever want to toe the line of having any alcohol misuse issues, right? I just want to, so this is sort of my homage to the beer gods. Hey, keep looking at me. I really enjoy this hobby of mine, but I want to make sure that I maintain a healthy relationship. So dry January is something that I do. And, I was talking with Rob Cohane about this, a little bit ago. He's a patron that I know well. And he was talking about, with him, whenever he drinks alcohol, especially as he gets into that 3-4 beer range, he starts to eat more. You want to snack more, right?
Sure.
And I can remember all those times I went to McDonald's and got French fries. So just French fries. That's all I wanted after drinking was French fries. So I think there is a health component to this, and I would argue too that that's also where you're getting into sort of not problems with alcohol necessarily, but the things that alcohol does to you, right? If you find yourself homebrewing and gaining weight, one of the things you may want to look at is look at your alcohol consumption as an opportunity to lose weight, because alcohol does contribute calories, but those are just some issues that and reasons why I think people are interested in no alcohol. But I think there's also this movement of hey, I'm athletic, or I do a sport. I mean, hell, they serve Michelob Ultra at the end of marathons, right?
Oh, it's awful too. I made the mistake of running a half marathon once. I'll never do that again. Again, more power to the people who enjoy that stuff, but it was awful for me. And they gave me a Michelob Ultra. Oh my God, it was so bad. Yeah. I'll take a Miller Lite with just slightly more carbs if you ask me.
Yeah. But, I mean, that's another one of those brands, Athletic Brewing Company, which is a brand we'll talk about in the next segment. But, that's their whole shtick, right? Is, hey, we're non-alcohol beer so that you can have a beer without feeling, like guilty about it, I guess. Even though I agree, there's nothing that you need to feel guilty about. And I've said it before and I'll say it again. I love the alcohol aspect of beer. I like the buzz that it gives me. I like the flavor of alcohol. I like those things and I enjoy it. And it's actually one of the reasons why I think I was jokingly saying I don't think I could consume 5 non-alcohol beers. It may actually be less than that. I'm not sure I could have more than 2 non-alcohol beers, and I'd just be like, no, I'm done. I don't want to. I just want to drink something else tonight. It's just it just doesn't have the alcohol, and so for that reason, I just don't want to drink more of them.
Yeah, I to me, again, we will dig into certain brands and stuff in a bit, but to me, there is we know that alcohol on its own, ETOH, ethanol, has a flavor component, and it also, when combined with all of the other aspects of beer, helps to amplify the other characteristics that make the beer taste beery. I don't know how else to put it, and to me, that's what I'm after. So that big of a change by taking the alcohol out, it's akin to my mind, again, as the single perspective dude that I am, to like not putting hops in beer. It's kind of the same idea. It's a necessary part of the brewing process, or the beer drinking, I guess. Again, for my preferences. And I remember you and I were talking a while back, Cade, and you said, well, but what about those times you don't want to have alcohol? And I was like, well, then I just won't drink beer. I don't care. I love beer, but I've never been the guy who I love the flavor more than I like the buzz. No, I like it all together, man. That is why I like beer so much. Part of the magic of brewing to me is turning, wort into alcoholic beer. Like that is so a part and parcel to the whole brewing thing and my love of this hobby, that it's hard for me to separate that. But at the same time, I absolutely understand why others would want to consume the flavorful, styles of beer that don't screw with their thinking, that doesn't screw with their body. I know there are likely people out there who actually think non-alcoholic beer is better than normal beer. And I think that's rad,
Yeah, I mean, there's also, we sort of jokingly mentioned it earlier, but there are religious concerns too, right? There's a bunch of religions out there where alcohol consumption is against their religion. So they can't consume alcohol, and having options like low alcohol and no alcohol beer out at a club so you can be out there and participate with your friends, even though your religious experiences are different than maybe people who are drinking around you, is cool, right? Yeah. I mean, that's something as a market segment, I can certainly see why, breweries like Athletic and breweries like Bud Miller Coors have all made non-alcohol versions that people can buy. Do we enjoy it more than beer? No, I can say that for sure. I don't enjoy it more than beer. But like you said, it's near beer is what you've been referring to it as, which I don't know that I'd heard that before, but I really like that term. I don't know why I haven't. Yeah. But near beer is great. It's the same thing with like Beyond Meat doesn't taste exactly like beef, but I still like Beyond Meat. And so I'll find myself like sometimes at a restaurant ordering, they've got an Impossible Burger. Yeah, I'm going to order that just because I like the flavor of Impossible Burger. And, for whatever reason, I'm not saying that it's healthier or better for me. It's just, I like that flavor and that's what I want right now.
That's a perspective I really appreciate. And that's the way that I've kind of trained myself to think about it as well. I hate that we're using the vegetarian vegan thing as the analogy here, but I feel like it fits right. fairly well. I was down in LA. We have some family that live down in LA, and I was down there a few months ago for a birthday party. And my sister and brother-in-law are, my wife's brother and his wife are pescatarian, like your wife. And so we were doing grilling burgers, and they brought what is one of their favorite, non-meat based burger things. And I'm asking my sister-in-law about it, and she's telling me, it's so good. It tastes just like a burger. And so in my mind, I'm primed to think that it tastes like that's going to taste like a burger. So when it was done, she gave me a bite of it, and it did not taste like a burger in the slightest. And I think that's a part of the issue, is when we can have separate narratives for these two different things, regular beer and non-alcoholic beer or low alcohol beer. It allows us to view them independently, right? We're not expecting the one to taste like the other necessarily, but its own thing. And when I'm able to separate my expectation, kind of suspend that and view, this thing as being its own thing and being different, I feel like it makes it easier for me to appreciate what it has to offer on its own, right? But obviously it is when we're talking about low and no alcohol beers, it is still beer. You're employing basically the same processes. Now that's probably one of the bigger things I would have an issue with. I'm kind of a guy who likes the simple brew days, and I know that there are some pretty convoluted methods that you have to go through to ensure that alcohol is low enough or even out of that beer.
Well, yeah, and I mean, I don't want to jump too far off into the methods because we do want to do an experiment or an experience episode on that. But yeah, I mean, you look at what they call arrested fermentation, which is like you just let the beer ferment. You brew a regular beer, or maybe to a little bit lower starting gravity, and then you just stop the fermentation by crashing the beer, or like crashing out the yeast, or filtering out the yeast, or doing something like that. Then there's what I think a lot of people have been exploring with more recently, it's a high mash temperature method. So, doing it at like 180 degrees Fahrenheit or whatever that comes out to be, maybe like 75 C or 80 C, something like that. And that inhibits amylase activity, which stops those longer chain or the longer chains dextrins from being chopped up into consumable units, fermentable sugars that the yeast can consume. So then there's only a little bit that the yeast can consume. So if you brew a beer to like, 10, 20 starting gravity, using that high mash temperature, it only ferments down to 10, 12 or 10, 15. So you're only getting a tiny amount of alcohol, but you are getting some of that fermentation character. So there's all these sort of questions about methods. And I think the whole point there of those methods, though, Marshall, is to your point. There's something that happens when yeast consumes sugar, not just alcohol itself, because we know alcohol has a flavor, but there's something that happens, the way that yeast interacts with all of the other compounds in beer that makes it beer, right? It gives it what I think Dr. Tondini, or Federico Tondini, talked about in the Brew Lab podcast episode that we did on low alcohol methods. He talked about fermentation character, right? It's just, this is what it tastes like. It's got this fermentation character, and that's a flavor I really like. I like it in kimchi. I like it in other fermented foods. I like it in beer, and that's something that's really good. But it's challenging whenever you're learning how to brew. And then, of course, the biggest issue is contamination. Right?
That would be my biggest concern. I mean, you think about some of the more common methods that I've read about, and there are great resources out there online. We've had an article written by the guys who run a low, no alcohol brewing blog. You can check that out. But a lot of the methods that are used, in essence, rely on the higher mash temp. You are making a wort that still has sugar in it, but you're arresting the fermentation. So what happens if a wild yeast gets in there? What happens if a bacteria gets in there? With a regular beer, we know it happens. And that's when the sugars have mostly been fermented out. Well, what happens when they get in there and there's still more sugar to go? One, it could create, bottle bombs or whatever else, can really ruin a batch of beer. But what if it's a yeast, some wild yeast that has the ability, I don't know, to ferment maltotriose or something like that, and you end up having a 4% alcohol beer unwittingly, like those things would concern me if I had to stay away from alcohol.
Well, yeah, and there's more scary concerns, right? I mean, Fusarium is a bacteria that's a pathogen, right? And that's not generally in beer because of alcohol and because of hops, but that in a no alcohol beer, depending on how you're making it, you can actually have food pathogenic. You can have pathogens that are in there because the pH of a non-alcoholic beer is generally not low enough to kill off those other organisms. So it's not only just like lactic acid and wild yeast. I mean, you can actually have dangerous beer. So there's all that sort of question, about it. And I mean, I did that recent episode of the Brew Lab with David Quain, who's the editor of the Journal of the Institute of Brewing, and we talked about draft dispense. And so he was saying just using a draft line, dispensing a non-alcoholic beer that's uncontaminated, dispensing it into a glass, you infect it, right? And so think about the beer that's been sitting in the line for however long. It could be infected with who knows what was in that line just because it doesn't have these other factors that protect it like normal beer does. So I'm not trying to scare anybody about no alcohol beer, but it's just that, if you're brewing it, these are also things you probably should be thinking about.
Absolutely. You have to consider all of this stuff. My take on this, I know there are various methods, but the one that I remember thinking years ago, if I wanted to make a very, very low or no alcohol beer, what would I do? And we know that the flash point of alcohol is much lower than the boiling point of water. And so I thought, you put a heat stick in there, you kind of move it around and see what happens. And there is a way to kind of get that people are using to do that. Basically using that approach where they heat the fermented beer, right? And then to drive off the alcohol and then chill it back down. To me, you are just asking for an oxidation problem by doing that. So it's, again, just all of these methods that just seem really convoluted. And I have a feeling, that there's going to be some new developments coming out from these people who are really focusing on low and no alcohol beer that are going to make the process a lot more effective, a lot more efficient. And I think that'll be really cool for those folks. So we've gone over some of our general thoughts on low and no alcohol brewing, but we haven't really touched much yet on what we think about the way such beers actually taste. That is going to be our focus when we're back from these messages. As every brewer knows, the best beer requires the best hops, which Yakima Valley Hops provides fresh from the source to brewers around the world, carrying everything from classics like Cascade to modern favorites like Galaxy and Mosaic, as well as other ingredients and gear. Yakima Valley Hops has it all. And don't forget to check out their new podcast, The Late Edition, where the YVH crew goes into depth on our favorite plant with industry experts. Head over to YakimaValleyHops.com now to see all they have to offer and subscribe to The Late Edition wherever it is you listen to podcasts. There's no denying that stainless steel is the best material for brewing equipment, and Delta Brewing Systems offers some of the lowest prices on high-quality stainless gear, like the Firm Tank, which in addition to holding 8 gallons or 30 liters of wort, comes with a domed lid to even further reduce the chances of a messy blow-off. Plus, it can hold up to 4 psi of pressure for closed transfers. Delta Brewing Systems also has their own line of brew kettles, as well as one of the lowest-priced all-in-one electric brewing systems out there, and their prices are shockingly low. If you're in the market for legit stainless gear that won't break the bank, do yourself a favor and head over to deltabrewingsystems.com today. Chilling wort can be a chore, especially after a long brew day, but not with the Exhilarator Counterflow Chiller, which can chill a 5-gallon or 19-liter batch of wort in 5 minutes or less, leading to a strong cold break and clear wort in the fermenter. Brewlosophy's Matt Del Fiacco uses the Exhilarator Max and absolutely loves it. In addition to improved chilling efficiency, every Exhilarator comes with a 5-year warranty that covers the entire chiller for manufacturer defects. If you're looking to up your chilling game and a CFC is right for you, head over to exhilarator.com today. Up until about 3 years ago, the only near beer I'd had were emulations of mass market lager. So before we jump into the modern craft versions of low and no alcohol beers, I figured we could touch on some of the classics first. And first up, the very first near beer I ever tried was O'Doul's, which is made by Anheuser-Busch. It claims to have only 0.2% ABV, which is incredibly low. And they offer both pale and amber lager versions. Cade, I know you're younger than me. Have you ever had O'Doul's?
Yeah, I'm younger than you, but I'm not that much. I've definitely had O'Doul's.
You never heard near beer, man. That's what we called it.
Fine, but yeah, I mean, so I didn't hear that, but I've heard, I've definitely had O'Doul's. And I've had it a lot. I've had both. I've had the pale and the amber.
So
versions.
have I. Yeah. What do you think?
Yeah. It's not my favorite.
So here's the weird thing. I actually don't think it's that bad for a non-alcoholic beer.
Of course you do.
I know. It sounds weird because to me, the thing about O'Doul's, you expect pale and amber lagers to be pretty thin and crisp and carbonated. And so they get away with, I think, making a beery flavored non-alcohol beer because of the fact that it's already, going to be thinner and crisp anyway. So it still has some of those normal beer characteristics. It smells like a big, mass market lager, in my opinion. It does have some characteristics that there's a reason I'm not buying O'Doul's daily. But yeah, I actually don't think it's awful.
Well, it's the mouthfeel loss for me, right? It's like it's like a mass market lager, but even more watery, right? I mean, there's already thin in those mass market lagers, which again, I love mass market lagers, but that alcohol just gives it the body that it needs, in my opinion. And like I mean, I don't want to crap on O'Doul's, but I mean,
I don't think they're going to care if we do, man.
Yeah, they're not listening to this. Although if they would, it'd be great sponsor opportunity.
Hey, yeah, come on, O'Doul's.
But no, I mean, but it's that loss of body, right? It's that wateriness, that watery aspect to it. And I feel like, you mentioned earlier, there's a reason why, if you're going to drink a beer, you're going to drink it because it's got alcohol in it. And I think that's a problem, right? With the loss of alcohol, you lose that body sometimes. Yeah. And O'Doul's, in my opinion, is the best example of that, where it's just, I already expect a thin body from a mass market lager, but man, O'Doul's just has nothing. It's just like you said, it's like beer flavored water.
Well, and interestingly, with O'Doul's, it is I think the main three kind of mass market versions of near beer. It is the lowest alcohol one with 0.2%, and maybe that plays into that thinness, and probably also why, in my opinion, O'Doul's doesn't just smell like unfermented wort. It actually does kind of have a beery character to it. So again, I'm not a huge fan of the stuff, but I don't think it's awful. The one that I drank the most when I was younger, and I know that sounds really weird, but we had a thing when I was in high school where we thought it was cool for like 2 months to drink Sharps, and that's made by Miller. It's 0.4% ABV. I believe they only have a pale lager. I don't think they have the two pale and amber versions. But Sharps, again, very common. I believe that actually came out in like the mid 90s. I don't think it's as old as O'Doul's. But again, this is one where I remember the first time I had it, I think I was 17 years old, and I cracked this bottle and I was like, wow, it actually smells like beer. It doesn't have a weirdness to it. It actually, to me, smelled and kind of tasted like beer. Now, I will admit, I have not had a Sharps in probably 20 years at this point, but I do remember thinking it was decent.
I was trying to remember. I don't think I've ever actually had a Sharps. I don't even know that I've seen it on the grocery store shelves. Maybe I just haven't looked all that closely, which is surprising because I have tried most of the non-alcoholic beers. I mean, again, after several years of dry January, I'm going to drink something. So, but Sharps is one of those that I haven't tried a lot of. But I guess, I mean, the way you describe it to me sounds a lot like O'Doul's. I'm not sure that I would know much of a difference between the two.
So I'm not sure how O'Doul's is made, but Sharps, Miller actually has a process that they claim to use that is it's secret, and all of this. But apparently they're driving off the alcohol it's not like unfermented wort. They're actually like fermenting the beer like normal, and then with this proprietary process driving the alcohol off. So it does have this fermented beer flavor, and I think that's what makes it more palatable to me. Again, these aren't beers that I'm going to be sitting around and throwing back with my friends. I've had them before, usually when I was younger because I couldn't buy real beer. And again, not totally offensive, actually pretty decent. The other kind of long-term classic, this is an interesting one. I'm curious if you've had it, Cade. I think they call it Klausstaller. Original?
Yeah, Klausstaller. Yeah.
So this is a non-alcoholic brewery in Germany that's been around for quite a while. All of their beers are 0.5% ABV or lower, I believe, and they've got a variety of different beers, all low and no alcohol. But the one that I've had is a pale lager. I had a friend of mine who went into surgery for something, an older friend of mine, and the doctor was like, "You cannot drink for like the next 3 months because of the medicine they were on." And so I went out and I bought him this stuff, thinking, "Wow, this looks like they know what they're doing." I'm sorry, Klausstaller. It tastes like unfermented wort, and I could not finish a bottle of this stuff.
See, all right, I like Klausstaller.
Oh, it's
I liked it better.
Gross.
I liked it better than O'Doul's because it has it's got that wort flavor to it, but it's also got a hoppiness in there too. Where it's like O'Doul's is just like straight mass market lager, or mass market amber lager, depending on which one that you get. There's just not much to it, right? It's just very clean. It's very crisp. It's very refreshing and quenching. But Klausstaller actually tastes like a beer to me, or at least I would say, let me caveat that was the closest that I had ever gotten to to beer. That was the most near beer that I had gotten to, other than some of the more recent craft brands that we'll talk about in a minute. But Klaushaller's got that. It had that dry hop character. It's brown. It's worty. It's got like maltiness to it. And that one was to me that was the closest that I could get whenever I was trying to find like no alcohol substitutes. But you make a good point, though. That one does say that it says it's less than 0.5%, so it could be up to 0.5% ABV. So having the highest ABV of the sort of we'll call them old school non-alcoholic beers, the classics.
The classics, yeah. It sounds like you're referring to what Klaushaller calls their dry hop or something like that.
Yeah.
So I've not had that. I've only had their original, which I would say is kind of their version of like an O'Doul's or a Sharps. It's just a pale lager and green bottle, and I've also had Heineken's non-alcohol one. I like the flavor of Heineken. A lot of people are really against the whole like Heineken and Beck's and all that. To me, the Heineken one of the four was probably my favorite. It still had that kind of, it's not skunk, but it had that really unique Heineken character. It just wasn't as fulfilling. It didn't have that fullness of flavor. But the Klaushaller, really, I mean, the original, and you can find this pretty much anywhere. We have it on the shelves here in Fresno. I bought it for my friend up in Seattle. It tastes just like wort to me, and that is not pleasurable in the slightest. Again, maybe it's because of my expectation that it's supposed to taste like a fermented beer. I don't know. I don't know what process they're using of the many that are out there, but just not my thing. So now, obviously, and part of the reason we're doing this show is because of the fact that the craft brewing world is really starting to get into making these low and no alcohol beers. Cade, you have far more experience than I do, but I'll start by sharing a little bit of a story of the very first non-alcoholic craft beer that I had. It was only a year ago. I was hanging out with a group of guys, and one of those guys, somebody I had just met, was opening these beer cans that I'd never seen before. And I think I'm sitting there drinking like a Modelo or something like that. And he's drinking these like really fancy looking craft beer cans. And I'm like, dude, where'd you get those? You mind if I have one? And he's like, well, they're not alcoholic. They're actually non-alcoholic beers. And he's pouring them into glasses. They looked good. Didn't really hold a head much, but he offered me one. He actually offered me two. Both of them were from, I think it's called Bravis Brewing out of Anaheim, California. And one was a blonde ale and the other was the oatmeal dark. So the first one I drank was the Bravis blonde ale. Before I give my opinion, have you had anything from Bravis yet?
I've not had Bravis, no.
So I believe their focus is low and no alcohol beers, and I got to give it to them. These were I was not expecting them to taste as beery as they did. And I believe I don't know the exact ABV on these particular beers, but I think they're like 1% or lower, something like that. The blonde ale, it had really little malt flavor. The bitterness was definitely there, more so than what you get in the kind of mass market non-alcoholic beers. The mouthfeel was very, very thin, unexpectedly thin. I thought they might use something like maltodextrin or something to up that mouthfeel, but it just wasn't there. The flavor kind of washed off of my palate, almost like when you're drinking a flavored sparkling water. You get that flavor, you swallow, it just goes away. That's how this beer, I perceived this beer as being. It was decent. Would I pay to drink it? I don't think so. I'd probably rather have just a regular, alcoholic blonde ale. But I got to give them credit. It was not as bad as I expected it to be.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't had Bravis, but my experience was so similar with Athletic Brewing Company, and it's just, I think the thing I like the most about what these two what these two breweries are doing is the range, right? You mentioned an oatmeal dark and a blonde in Bravis.
Yeah,
we didn't talk about oatmeal dark or blonde in Klaushaller or Sharps or O'Doul's,
yeah,
right? I mean, we talked about they're very similar to the pale lagers, right? That are popular. Even Klaushaller's dry hopped is still really close to like an amber lager. But those beers, like you said, though, it's pretty impressive what they've been able to do. I mean, I was looking at like this year, I think was the first year that I had tried Athletic Brewing Company, and it was during my dry January, and I was trying to find a beer that I could find that was non-alcoholic, and I was online on like grocery store app, and looking at non-alcoholic beers to see what I could find, and there's quite a bit of craft out there. So Athletic Brewing was one. There's a brewery in Bend called Crux, which that has a non-alcoholic IPA. Which was really cool. And so I actually just went and bought a whole bunch of these and tried them. And I mean, I was actually pleasantly surprised. I mean, they are near beers. Okay. So same Beyond Meat to beef comparison, right?
We're going to keep doing it, man.
I mean, it just makes sense, right? It's just not beef, but it's okay. It's like equally as good to me as beef. Like I don't have any problem drinking it other than I'm not getting a buzz from it. But it was really cool having a golden ale, having something that's represented as a golden ale that actually tastes like a golden ale. It had hop character, it had body, it had like ale esters. You know, the IPA was bitter and hoppy and fruity. The porter was chocolatey and dark and had the body that was missing, that's missing from, you know, the mass market lagers. Like I talked specifically about Klausthaler original. I mean, especially the one in the green bottle. That one just tastes like water to me. There's just like nothing there. And I'm, you know, I was looking for a beer or something that is a near beer, and man, they're killing it, in my opinion. Athletic Brewing is really doing a great job.
Well, they've really made a name for themselves, and kudos to them. I have not had the opportunity to try any athletic beers yet, but I do look forward to it, in part because I just like trying new things. I know for a fact that I'm not going to be a non-alcoholic beer drinker. That's just not what I'm going to do. And like I said, I told you this before. If I don't want to drink alcohol, I'm not drinking beer. I'm not pining for the flavor of beer without the booze. I'm happy to just drink water. I mean, that's my, you know, what I drink most of anyway, so it doesn't bother me. I will say this, and I think this says something about Bravus's approach to brewing these near beers. That oatmeal dark smelled like an oatmeal stout. It smelled delectable. The flavor was separated from everything else. The flavor was on point. That mouthfeel was so thin, and I know there are people out there who are you know, focus on low and no alcohol brewing who have a different conception of what mouthfeel is and would probably describe, you know, Bravus's oatmeal dark as having a good mouthfeel. Compared to the stouts and porters that I usually drink, it was like watery. And like I said, I'm pouring this into a glass really hard, and the carbonation is there. It foams up, and then immediately that foam just went away. And it wasn't because of the glass, you know. I just think there's something about the process in making that beer, or these types of beers maybe, that doesn't really support you know, the head retention. But this is one where I did drink the whole can. I just wanted to get that out there. I drank the whole can, but that is where I stopped after that one can.
So here's the thing, Marshall. You got to stop talking. You got to stop thinking about these as beer. Right?
Honestly,
right?
I think that's what my problem is.
I think that's what you
is that and that's why I brought up the Beyond Meat thing. Is if you're not trying to emulate meat, but you're making something that is equally as enjoyable though different, my brain processes it differently, right?
Exactly.
My expectations are influenced by that. So,
and that's the expectation that I have when going in with non-alcohol beer. It's equally as enjoyable but different, right? I mean, it doesn't come with the alcohol, it doesn't come with the buzz, it doesn't come with those other things that I like. The same way that Beyond Meat doesn't come with all those, you know, beefy characteristics, the char that I really like in beef, or the way that the texture as you're biting into it, right? Or even sometimes even the look of it is different. But it's close enough that it's equally enjoyable in its own way. And when you're thinking about, at least whenever I'm thinking about low alcohol and non-alcohol beers, I'm thinking about drinking it in healthy situations. Or if you're female and you're pregnant and you can't drink, it's a great opportunity for you to still consume a near beer, right? There are a whole bunch of situations, a whole range of scenarios out there that this segment fits. I mean, you've said it a bunch and I've said it a lot too. Every beer has its place in its situation. And I think that non-alcoholic beers really have a spot too. You know, I mean, I'll give you another example of a non-alcoholic beer I've had. And you've had the alcoholic version. I know you have, but it's Deschutes Black Butte Porter.
I love the normal version of that beer. Yeah,
I know, right? It's a fantastic porter. It's so good. We were in Bend a few weeks back, or a few months back, and I was having a Black Butte Porter, and they obviously saw that my wife was pregnant, and they said, "Hey, do you want to try this experimental non-alcoholic Black Butte?" And she was like, "Yeah, of course I do." And she tried it. It was great. I mean, again, it wasn't the same as Black Butte Porter, but it was really good. It was a fantastic example of a no-alcohol porter. Now, I don't think you can get that anywhere anywhere outside of the Bend, Oregon tap room. So don't go looking for Deschutes Black Butte Porter just yet. But then I think about like Crux Fermentation Project. So Crux made this IPA that's sold up here, and that's just a local one. I'm sure if you go to your grocery store and look at non-alcoholic beers that are in the grocery store, in your grocery store, I'm sure there's going to be more than one. I mean, but Crux's IPA is the Northwest IPA. It's got this fantastic piney hop character. It's bitter. It's got all the right body and mouthfeel. And, you mentioned the mouthfeel being really light on the Bravas. And I don't know, maybe that's specific to the Bravas brand, but Athletic Brewing Company, in my opinion, and Crux and Deschutes' Black Butte Porter, those all had the right amount of body, a very similar body to beer. Like not even missing the body, but very, very similar. And I don't know how they do it. I mean, I'm sure they're adding something in, or keeping the residual extract higher, right? Maybe they're finishing off at 1030 or something, rather than, down at like 1010 or 1015. But those are really good examples. And I like having those choices in dry January, or, I've said I'm a daily drinker, so I have a beer every day. I rarely miss having a beer, but I don't have huge quantities of beer. I rarely drink. I can't even remember the last time I've had more than 3 beers in a day. But that's just me. That's how I drink. And it's one of those things. It's what I do. But having and throwing in a non-alcoholic beer, I don't know, it just kind of makes me feel better about, not having a beer every day, right?
Well, that's what I was going to say is I really appreciate that this is an option, and I absolutely understand this concept of enjoying it as being its own thing, its unique thing. My perspective though, and I really hope people understand, this is just me. This is how I operate. I love beer because of the alcohol, in part because of the alcohol that's in it. If that's not there, I don't really have much interest in drinking it. And I think I was kind of sitting here pondering, what else would it be that would make it like that? I really don't have like a obsession with drinking beer. It's the whole thing. It's the social aspect of it. It's all of that together. Well, if I'm not doing that, I honestly would prefer sparkling water. And I wonder if, what contributes to my own perspective on that. I know that there are going to be people who hear me say that and they think what I'm saying is, you shouldn't need to drink beer or whatever. That is not at all what I'm trying to say. I've actually had the pleasure, because I like trying new things, the pleasure of sampling a couple homebrewed samples of non-alcoholic or low alcohol beer. 2 of them, they were given to me at different events, and they were awful in my opinion. I don't think the brewers were bad. I think they were experimenting with new approaches. Both of those brewers weren't big fans of it either, but they wanted to try it out. They didn't taste like beer. I don't know what approaches these homebrewers used to make it, but they tasted just like unfermented wort, and it even had that kind of like when you taste a wort sample right after the boil and it's super bitter. It kind of had that thing going on as well. And it just was not my cup of tea. But again, if you make it and you can think about it independent of other beers and enjoy it, then I think that's awesome. And especially if you're using it for a purpose that may not have any effect in my world. If you're using it for your health, or you're using it to battle an addiction problem or something like that. I just think it's awesome that that's an option.
Well, yeah, I hear you say that you prefer sparkling water, and I'm just like, ugh.
Exactly. But that's my point, is I know a ton of people out there hate sparkling water. So me saying that I like it doesn't offend anybody, but me
exactly.
saying I don't like something will offend somebody. It's so weird to me that dichotomy.
No, yeah. Now, speaking of sparkling water, have you tried Bud Light Next?
Brother, I'm not going to try, but I'll try it if somebody hands it to me. Don't get me wrong, but that's not something that's on my top of my list. I'm a Miller guy,
Yeah, of course. I just had to throw that out there as we're getting close to the end. I don't even know what Bud Light Next is. It's a 4%, I don't know, something. Yeah, like I don't know, seltzer flavored beer or beer flavored seltzer. I don't know what it is. I still haven't figured it out in my own mind yet.
Well, based on my experiences so far, I'm not a huge fan of the way these low and no alcohol beers taste and feel in my mouth. Really, I think the mouthfeel is a big issue for me. As someone who has neither an allergy to alcohol or a problem with drinking, I'm perfectly fine saying that for me, alcohol is kind of a quintessential part of beer, not only for the perceptible impact it has, but for the way it makes me feel. I'll admit it. I've never been, like I said earlier, I've never been the dude who claims to only drink beer because I like the flavor. I've never gone that route. Sometimes I feel like people are making excuses for their drinking drinking behavior by saying that. I do love the flavor of beer, but I love the flavor of beer with alcohol in it, and I haven't found one without alcohol that I actually like enough to want to drink instead of regular beer. So here's the thing, and I said it before, but I want to wrap up with this as well. I love that people out there who aren't me, have the option of brewing and drinking low and no alcohol beer. I've never been the type who feels the need to convince others to adopt my perspective. So just because I don't like these beers that much doesn't mean I think low and no alcohol beer is stupid by any means. It is the exact opposite. In fact, I'm also not a huge fan of wit beer. I mean, but that doesn't mean I think nobody should like it. It's just a personal opinion. And if access to low and no alcohol beer means that you get to enjoy social aspects of drinking without the negative consequences, then I am all for it. I think it's great.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree, and I don't want to be like, seeming like the guy that's just like, no, you, Marshall, you have to love non-alcoholic beer. No, I mean, I get it, right? I'm not gonna like sparkling water. I don't care how many times people give it to me. I just don't like. I don't like it. Even if it gives me funny looks when I'm in fancy restaurants and I order tap water. Yeah. But no, I mean, it's just I love where the segment is going. Like you, Marshall, I love alcohol, I like alcohol.
It sounds crazy to say, but I know what you mean, Cade. Yeah.
Right. I like it. I like the buzz. I like the buzz that beer gives me. And I like drinking it. I like the flavor that it adds. I like all of those things. There's a reason why I'm passionate about beer. I also really enjoy having this other option, right? To make me feel healthier about it, 'cause, I mean, at the end of the day, I mean, alcohol is a poison, right? I mean,
Sure.
There's no getting around that. I mean, it is. So, having an option out there is nice for me. And it's certainly something that I enjoy and I like, and I'm really excited to see where this category goes. If we can start expanding out and, have a nice red ale or something, go and be able to have a whole bit, a broad range of non-alcoholic beers. That'd be really cool. I would really enjoy that.
So I couldn't agree more with you, even though I'm not going to drink it. I think is awesome is variety for those who do appreciate it. And just because I don't like something doesn't mean I wouldn't vote for, there being more of that stuff that other people enjoy. I think it's absolutely awesome. And one of the things I'm really excited about with low and no alcohol brewing is the fact that it's opening up an avenue for people who may not like the effects of alcohol to engage in this awesome hobby that we have been doing for so long. And if anything, there's that as a huge positive to this. So, there you have it. Our thoughts on low and no alcohol brewing and beers. Cade, is there anything else you'd like to add?
Yeah, Marshall, you need to go pick up some Athletic Brewing and check it out.
I will absolutely try Athletic. That is the brand that I have heard the most positive reports on, and it sounds like what they're doing is pretty awesome. I've only tried the few that I told you about earlier. I mean, maybe 5 non-alcoholic craft beers in my life that I've tried. So it could taste absolutely delicious. I'm telling you right now, if it doesn't have the alcohol in it, I'm probably not interested in drinking it because I'm happy with the other alternatives there are, whether that's water or milk or something like that. It's just a weird way of thinking for me. So, and my understanding, by the way, we didn't touch on this, but non-alcoholic beers still have pretty high calories, don't they?
Oh yeah, they can have almost the same calories as beer,
right,
as like regular beer. It just depends on how they brew it, right? If you've got a higher residual extract, you're just getting your calories from sugar rather than from alcohol.
Yeah. So interesting stuff. So, well, don't forget to subscribe to the Brew Lab, where Cade goes into the lab with brewing scientists to discuss research they've performed, and make sure to keep up with all of our beer and brewing antics over at brewlosophy.com. The Brewlosophy podcast is made possible by the generous support of our sponsors, as well as all of our rad listeners. We seriously could not do this without you. Cheers to everyone who has subscribed and left a review of our show. It makes a huge difference. If you haven't yet, please consider doing so. Head over to brewlosophy.com/support to view a list of ways you can easily help us to continue producing this podcast. If you want a reward for your support, visit patreon.com/brewlosophy. Thanks again for listening. We'll be back next week with another episode of the Brewlosophy podcast. Until then, think beer.
Start off the morning with some hot tea, lemon and honey, cause it soothes my throat. Put some herb in the bowl, yeah, it's homegrown. Ain't gotta go through the middleman no more.